Hello and welcome back to day 9 in the Louise Borglit trial. This is the case about the 30-year-old woman who was stabbed to death while walking her sister's dog. It was especially horrific as she was 7 months pregnant at the time. But let's take a quick recap and look at what happened in court today. If you remember, Louise was out walking her dog in this area of a town called Herlev. This is a park area near residential areas. It was in November, so it was dark, but a person came up to Louise, stabbed her 11 times. One of those stabs took off her nose. That had been an important part in this case because this defendant has been talking about the missing nose on undercover tapings of him from the prison where the police had put an undercover agent in to befriend him and talk about this case. They meant that by knowing the details about her nose being cut off, he would have to have special knowledge about the murder because it had never been brought up in papers or anything. He had the explanation that a police officer and a former defense lawyer had shown him the autopsy pictures, and that's why he had the knowledge. The police officer and the former defense lawyer were testifying that the last time in trial, and none of them could say with 100% certainty that they didn't show him the pictures. The police officer started out saying, well, it's not something I normally do, and ended up saying, well, I can't say for sure if I didn't do it. The defense lawyer said, well, I have so many cases, I don't know. But again, it's a little hole poked in the story about how he had this special knowledge. And again, this case is unique in the way that there are nothing linking the defendant to the murder scene. No DNA, no technical evidence, no murder weapon, no nothing. We had what we call a crown witness. She said she heard Louise scream 2 times. Afterwards, she saw a man came running, dressed in black, stopped exactly 10 paces in front of her. She had a good look at him, said he had dark eyes and an unhealthy look, like a drug addict. And then he ran away. She made a phantom sketch, and it could look like the defendant, but she didn't point him out in any pictures and say, this is the guy. But that's as far as this goes. She's the only one who probably saw him at the night, if it is the defendant. But today we started out by hearing from a specialist doctor in psychiatry. She had some meetings with the defendant close to the time of the murder. She described a person who was psychotic, probably because of his drug use. He was a heavy drug user. He was very pressed by the circumstance that he had lost his home. He didn't have any connections with his families. And she said he made her unsafe. On a scale from 1 to 10, he was a 7 on the unsafe scale. She wanted him to be admitted to a psychic hospital, but his own doctor said they didn't believe it. She said that after the description of the murderer was released to the papers, she had an idea that the defendant could be the perpetrator of this crime. She had 2 more that she believed could be the perpetrator, but she has since followed those and said, no, it couldn't be them. She still believes it was the defendant, but nothing else, nothing concrete. His own doctor's journals were also provided today in court, and it describes a totally different picture of this man. He said he was cooperative, he was friendly, he was not psychotic, but this specialist doctor said, well, sometimes if a psychiatric patient visits their own doctor, they are better because they want to seem better to somebody who they know. But she was very scared of him and had to believe he could be the guy. The next witness was a former inmate with this person. remember in the undercover tapings, there's a lot of talk about how to stab a woman, how to use a knife to kill somebody, and all these things that the defendant said, well, it was just me acting up because the undercover agent had a pretty gruesome cover story too, so I was just trying to act up for him. His ex-girlfriend has said that he talked about knives and stabbing people, but this inmate said, I never heard him talk about Louise Borglit at all. I have never heard him talking about any murder. And if he had said anything about killing a pregnant woman, they wouldn't have been friends because that was the lowest of the low. So he couldn't share any experience with this defendant that he was like we hear on the undercover tapes. There was no talk about stabbing people, no talk about killing people. So again, it pokes some holes in the story about the defendant. The next witness was a friend of his. He thought or remembered that at the time of the murder, this guy might have been visiting a friend, but he couldn't say if it was on that day or some other day. He told the court that the defendant often were carrying knives around, but not big knife. This is supposed to be like a big kitchen knife who have stabbed Louisa, and he said, well, it was only the small ones you use for peeling potatoes or cutting up vegetables. It wasn't the big knives he was walking around with, and it was just to act tough he carried knife. And he could tell that when the defendant used drugs, he changed, he became strange, as he said. So they were again in the environment of drugs, and when he did drugs, he became a different person. But he never heard him talking about killing anyone. Another friend testified at day 8 in court. He said that the defendant had told him that he stabbed somebody in the back, and if the friend wanted the knife, and the friend said, no, thank you, I don't want a knife. The prosecution wanted to re-interrogate the defendant, but he said, I don't want to participate in a re-interrogation, as in America, where you have the right to plead the fifth. He said, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I won't say anything else, and that's perfectly legal in Denmark. You can say, well, I don't want to cooperate. You are not forced to witness in your own case. You can always say, I don't want to talk anymore, and he did that today. So we didn't get the prosecution back and try to seal the holes that the witnesses poked in their story. The rest of the day was, again, some playing of the undercover tapes where you can hear the defendant talking about he was annoyed that this undercover agent keep bringing the Louise Borglit case up. He keep talking about it, and he didn't want to do it. And if you saw my first couple of videos, he said that he felt like he was pressured to talk about Louise. He didn't want to do it, but this undercover agent pressed him to speak about Louise Borglit. And he said it was kind of like an interrogation. And again, you can't interrogate a person if you haven't read them their rights. So again, something that's looking good for the defense, that he was annoyed that people kept asking him about this case because he didn't want to talk about it. He said that people shouldn't talk to each other about things like that because you don't really know people before you knew them for 6 months. That was his explanation. And we had the doctor's notes, and then we had they told about a witness who, at the night of the murder, saw somebody around the time of the murder leave the park where the murder happened. At the time, she believed she would recognize the person if she saw a photo, but she later retracted and said, I don't think I can remember how he looked. She described the person as an ethnic Danish person. The Crown witness said this person had like a golden sheen to the skin, like somebody who have been tanning a lot, not like a foreigner, but somebody who had been out in the sun a long time. The defendant in this case is an adoptive child from Colombia, so it's not really consistent with an ethnic Dane that his skin color should look like us normal or ethnic Danes. We are normally a bit pale. So again, a day full of witnesses, but not really the smoking gun in this case. It'll be interesting to see how the prosecution land this in their closing arguments, because they haven't really brought us closer to the murder weapon or the connection that puts him 100% at the murder scene. The crown witness saw somebody who could resemble him a lot, but if I don't know if that's enough, because again, any reasonable doubt has to fall in the way of the defendant. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty. But it'll be interesting to see the closing arguments in this case. But this was my day 9 update on the Louise Borglit case. Thank you for watching.